Hello friends and foes, my name is Kate and this is my channel, Chapter Kate. I took a bit of a break from filming in February because even though I have a big readathon I do in February, I like to participate in it from afar. I often experience depression in February and I just wanted to set myself up for success instead of setting myself up for disappointment by committing to a bunch of videos. So this is my first video back after taking a month off, and I'm going to be talking about what I've read so far this year. I've only read 6 books so far this year. I have a lot that I'm currently reading, and I have a lot that I wanted to read and just didn't get to yet. And it's really important for you to know that if you're in a similar situation as me, where you plan to read something or you plan to do something and something gets in the way, life gets in the way, you just run out of motivation, it's totally okay, because guess what? You can still do it now. You haven't run out of time yet, and you can still go back and do it. Never ever feel guilty for taking a break, especially from activities that can be draining at times. You need all the energy you can to get through difficult times, and the entire world is going through a difficult time right now. We have been for the past year. So forgive yourself if you need to take a break here and there. Now let's get into the books I've read so far. The first book that I read this year was An Unkindness of Magicians by Cait Adair. Now anyone who is familiar with my channel knows that this is actually my favorite book. This was a reread for me. This is an urban fantasy that takes place in New York. There's a secret sort of magic society that exists under New York, under the streets of New York, but those of us without magic can't see it. There's a lot of main characters in this book, so you get a lot of different perspectives of what's going on. But essentially something is going wrong with magic. Spells are going wrong, people are getting hurt, even simple spells are going wrong. And there's this thing called the Turning that happens every so often. Turning is this big magic competition. Everybody knows that magic competitions are awesome. And so the Turning is a big magic competition, and it determines who leads the magical world until the next turning. This book deals with a lot of heavy topics, including being complicit in a society that is doing wrong and doing harm. And it also addresses the topic of grief. This is something I didn't notice the first read through, but there's this aspect of grief at the very end. And it's not necessarily for a person, but a grief for something else. And I have experienced grief towards something that is really important to me, and I've never really seen it on the page like this. Some of you might know, but my main instrument is percussion. I'm a percussionist, but my main instrument in percussion is the marimba. The marimba is like a giant xylophone, and it's really beautiful. It makes beautiful music, but it's extremely expensive. So after I graduated college, I was no longer able to play my favorite instrument that I'd played for years. It was my companion through a lot of tough things. And so I've experienced that type of grief. And so to see that grief sort of on a page like this was meaningful to me. I actually cried. But it was just beautiful, and it was just as good as the first time I read it. If you haven't read this book and you love just some good, beautiful urban fantasy, you should go for it. If you are a fan of Neil Gaiman's writing, you will probably like it as well, because it's kind of similar style-wise. The second book I read this year was Over the Woodward Wall by A. Deborah Baker. This is actually by Shannon McGuire, but this is a pen name because this is an in-universe book in Middle Game. So this is supposed to sort of be a parallel book to The Wizard of Oz. There are these two kids that are walking to school, or they're trying to walk to school one day, and somehow they end up in this magical world where there's a lot of creepy stuff that goes on. It's also about friendship and kind of bonding within a tough situation. It's also a story about adventures, about letting go of perfection, and about giving girls swords, because I think every girl should be given a sword. The way this is set up at the end makes me feel like there are going to be more of these, which would be really cool. So hopefully there are. The third book that I read was The Tea Dragon Society, and this is by Katie O'Neill. I've been meaning to read this for a while. I was actually gifted this last year for Valentine's for the Bookish Cupid. So this was a really, really adorable book. I read it with my friend Keely. We just sat on the library floor and read it. And it was just so sweet. It was so sweet. There are these little dragons, and they're tea dragons, and they each have a certain type of tea plant on their head, and you can harvest it. And it's just... The art is so adorable. It's so sweet. They're these two girls, and they kind of like each other, and one has issues with her memory. She kind of forgets things really easily, and she starts to remember this other girl who's actually the blacksmith's daughter, and it's just very wholesome and warm. It's got disability representation. It's got LGBTQIA plus representation. Characters have diverse skin tones. It's just really... It's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. And you should check it out. The fourth and fifth books that I read were Age of Legend and Age of Death by Michael J. Sullivan. This is part of the Legends of the First Empire series. There are books 4 and 5 in my read books of the year, but there are also books 4 and 5 in the series. This series has a lot of different species, kind of like your traditional fantasy species like dwarves. You got humans, you got like elf type creatures, you got giants and goblin-y type things. But the series itself starts out with these humans. They kill one of these elven creatures that to that moment were believed to be unkillable, and that sparks a whole war. And so the books sort of follow the progression of that war. There's a large cast of characters. There's a very interesting magic system. It kind of reminds me of the Force in Star Wars, kind of that magic system where there's sort of a omnipresent power that you can tap into if you have a certain gift. It's very interesting. Age of Legend ended on the biggest cliffhanger. I wanted to punch the author in the face because it just stressed me out so much. But then Age of Death sort of remedied that and quickly fixed, the cliffhanger. Let me know what was happening next. Age of Death is probably the most different out of the series. What happens in Age of Death is very, very weird. It takes you to a place that the rest of the series kind of doesn't go. And it takes you to a place where not a lot of books do go, but I can't tell you what it is because that would be a huge spoiler. But the series itself is very well written. The characters are super deep. There's a lot of awesome empowerment of women, of people who are disabled. It's really cool. And if you like really awesome, like action-centered fantasy, I think you'd like this. And in the 6th book that I have read so far this year is An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon. River Solomon wrote The Deep, which was one of my favorite reads of 2020. An Unkindness of Ghosts is an Afrofuturism book that takes place on this giant ship that's kind of set up like the antebellum South. There's a lot of racism, there's a lot of classism. There are power-hungry individuals in security positions that treat everyone else like garbage. The main character exhibits a lot of symptoms of autism, so if you are looking for a book with autism representation, this would be a great place to go. One thing about this book is it doesn't pull any punches. It stabs you in the gut and stabs you again and stabs you again and then twists and then pours some salt in it. It hurts to read. It is very painful to read, but it's written very well, and it achieves the goal that it set out to achieve. The main character doesn't see the world the same way the people around her do. So it's very interesting to see how she processes what's going on around her, how she processes the environment and the society in which she has been raised, the way she rebels and pushes back against oppression. It's all around a very, very well written book. I just want to prepare you that if you decide to read it, it is very painful to read. I didn't give a single one of those books anything less than 5 stars. A lot of people kind of judge people based on the stars that they give, but I don't feel like it makes me any less of a critical reader if I give them 5 stars, because I like to discuss the content of books and the meanings behind books rather than kind of grading it. And I'm also really good at picking books that I know I'm going to enjoy, so there's that. But I'm working on a couple of new videos that are going to come out soon, but I wanted to go ahead and put this one out there since it's been a month. I took a nice month off, and now I'm going to work on some new content for y'all. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to let out that breath you didn't know you were holding. Bye! Tripping over shadows and I'm drowning in the night. I feel the soldiers coming and I'm putting up a fight.